Welcome back to The Briefing with Steve Scully on SiriusXM's POTUS, Channel 124.
If you were listening to the program a couple of weeks ago, one of my guests here in the program to talk about the state of this race, Campaign 2024, also teaches political science at the University of Dayton. His name is Professor Christopher Devine, and during the interview with the students in the classroom, he spoke about a class project, a memo to each of the campaign managers in this election, so that being Susie Wiles of the Trump campaign and Jen O'Malley Dillon from the Harris campaign. So in real time during the interview, I said, hey, how about if the top two students in the class assignment join me here on the briefing? He said yes, the students said yes, and today we have those two students, Jakob Burdick and Reid, both juniors, both from Ohio. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Haley, let me begin with you because your memo was addressed to the Harris-Walz campaign and the instructions from your professor that you're professional. You're not to be a cheerleader. You're basically writing a memo to call it as you see it. So for Vice President Harris, from your memo, how does she get to 270 electoral votes?
That's exactly right. I was in a very unique position going into this assignment due to my double majors, one being in political science and the other being in public relations. So throughout this campaign memo, I really leaned into that professional sense and that dual enrollment, if you will, as I developed a plan to get Harris-Walz to 270 electoral votes. The way I thought of doing that is through primetime interviews, and particularly through targeting Pennsylvania, as Pennsylvania has one of the largest electoral college vote numbers out of all of the swing states that I studied. And how to do that, earned media is incredibly important throughout a campaign. So leveraging the idea of messaging, pocketbook economics, and really making Harris and Walz seem like typical Democrats will be key to get them to 270.
And so let me turn to you, Jakob Burdick, because your memo was written to Susie Wiles, the Trump campaign, and Donald Trump has had a very unconventional campaign cycle this year. So how does he get to 270? What's your advice to the Trump-Vance campaign?
Yeah, so I identified on my map, I have 5 states that are up for grabs, essentially. So Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then, of course, Pennsylvania. And I have the Trump campaign focusing on Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, with Pennsylvania getting Trump to exactly 270. And I have him focusing on a positive message. Oftentimes in class, we talked about how positive messaging versus attack ads often do better with voters. And then in Pennsylvania specifically, I noticed that from 2016 to 2020, the Biden-Harris campaign was really able to ramp up the ground game. So in Allegheny County, Chester County, and Bucks County, they were able to garner a lot more support over those 4 years. So I have the Trump campaign really focusing on those 3 counties, really trying to excite voters for the Trump campaign.
And Jakob, in that ground campaign that you wrote about in your memo, you talk a lot about the door-to-door canvassing, the supporters of Donald Trump touching the voters, shaking hands with them, especially in those key counties in and around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Why do you think that that's a successful tactic or technique in American politics?
Yeah, so, there are plenty of studies that show that, really meeting the voters where they're at oftentimes has a lot better connection with the voters. And I can relate to that completely. I've worked on several campaigns, and I've noticed that really has a great deal of impact. So not only am I relying on personal experiences, but also some political science data and research.
And Haley, you spent a lot of time also talking about Pennsylvania. You're right, 19 electoral votes. So among the battleground states, the Keystone State has the most. But what about some of the other scenarios, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, for the path to get to 270?
Sure. I identified several blue wall states as really critical to Harris and Walz' success in reaching those 270 electoral votes. Collectively, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. However, I did choose to focus on Pennsylvania because no Democrat has won the White House without winning Pennsylvania since 1948. So that's really where that strategy came along.
And let's talk about the instructions from your professor, because this was really a lesson for you to think strategy, to think communications, to think tactics. So, Haley, what did you learn in the process?
This campaign memo was incredibly transformative in my understanding of what a campaign really needs to focus on in order to get to 270 electoral votes. As I watch primetime interviews of presidential candidates, it's easy for me, and I think a lot of other people in the current political state, to have these messages kind of just go over their heads, or have them reaffirm their beliefs that they've already been accustomed to. But something that really stood out to me throughout this process is how influential it can be. So, for example, some of the studies that we've been learning in class talked about campaigning and campaign events and doing the boots on the ground work. But in my research, I found that only 20% of adults aged 30 years or less watch local news. So those campaign events and how they leverage local news might not be as productive as a primetime interview. And while it might not specifically target Pennsylvania, as I've identified throughout my campaign memo, its impact might be wider than that and really set them over the 270 votes needed.
Well, I am really impressed having read both of the memos, and I have to ask, did Professor Devine give you both an A or an A+? Jakob?
I was satisfied with my grade, yes.
That is a real politician answer. Haley, how about you? Were you satisfied with your grade?
I sure was, yes.
So, final question for both of you, and Haley, we'll begin with you. Just tell the POTUS audience a little bit about yourself, why you are studying political science at the University of Dayton, and what you learned in this process, this campaign memo.
Yes. Well, hello, listeners. My name is Haley Reid. I am a junior undergraduate student here at the University of Dayton, double majoring in public relations and political science with the minor in pre-law. I'm originally from the Toledo, Ohio area, but have made my home here in Dayton over the past few years, mainly because of the environment in which people like Professor Devine have created within the academic spaces that I've been a part of. And this campaign memo has been just so impactful on my outlook for the presidential election, as it's really reinforced the idea that voting is so critically important. So regardless of what you believe, I encourage all listeners to vote if you are registered.
This has been a lot of fun. Jakob, what about your background?
Yeah, so I'm a junior here at the University of Dayton studying political science. I'm also attempting to get my master's in public administration. So I'm all in on political science in that regard. This assignment was really impactful for me, being able to look at the campaign through a different lens, more analytical, more strategic, rather than just what I agree with or what my roommates believe in. So it was really impactful for that. I cannot extend my praise enough for Dr. Devine and his area of expertise. He's very incredible with some of the work he does, and I really appreciate the invitation to come on your show.
Well, we love having him on the program. So, Jakob, yes, no, or maybe? Any interest in seeking public office?
Yes.
And Haley, how about you? Yes, no, or maybe?
It's definitely not out of the question.
Well, terrific. Hey, thank you both